You have an enemy that is waiting. You have an enemy that's waiting. Elijah experienced this as well. Going back to the Old Testament, Elijah was a prophet. He was a great prophet of the Old Testament. And in 1 Kings chapter 18, he has a mountaintop experience. I mean, probably one of the best experiences of his entire life, where he felt so good about where God was leading him. A great victory, and he knew God was with him. And God came through in a powerful way. What was happening was, in Israel, there was a weak, wicked, passive king named Ahab. And he let his wife just lead them astray. Because he wasn't strong, because he wasn't the leader. And his wife is the famed Jezebel. And Jezebel led him astray and introduced all these false gods, these false prophets, and all these things that they were worshiping this being known as Baal. And there were all these Baal worshipers. And something struck in Elijah's spirit that said, this isn't right. And God put him on a path. And he tells the king, you need to stop this. You need to get rid of all this. And then he starts lambasting and insulting all the prophets. And he says, basically, you need to choose. People of Israel, you need to choose. Either follow the one true God, or you follow Baal. But by the way, Baal is a false god, and I'm going to show you. And so they had this big spiritual showdown, and they were all on this Mount Carmel, and they went to this mountain, and they had all these sacrifices, and all the Baal worshipers and the prophets, the false prophets of Baal were there. They were cutting their arms and their wrists, and it was part of their practice, and they were crying out to their God. They had all their animal sacrifices, and nothing happens. And this went on and on and on, and nothing happened. And Elijah's loving it because he knows this is nonsense. He knows this is silliness. So he's just insulting them and insulting them. And then he says, okay, now that you're done with that, now I want to pray to the real God. And he says, no, but I'm going to make it where you truly believe. And he has these people bring up all this water and pour it all over the altars. Because the altar, you're meant to light on fire. You're meant to burn these sacrifices. It's meant to be an aroma to God. But he says, no, I'm going to make it hard. Your gods, your fake gods, couldn't even start a fire, couldn't even burn up these altars while it was dry. I'm going to show you how great my God is, and I'm going to do it wet. And he pours out all this water all over it and drenches it completely. And then he prays to the real true God and prays. In a matter of moments, they ignite and burst into flames. And Elijah's on the mountaintop because God came through. But he got to the mountaintop by himself. He got to success isolated. Yeah, he was doing it for God. God was leading him there, but he did it isolated. And so when that word got back to Ahab, who then told Jezebel, Jezebel said, I'm going to kill him. I'm going to make him like these false prophets. I'm going to kill him. And Elijah is scared to death. And Elijah, who was so strong, so powerful when he believed God was with him, at the word of this woman, he's scared to death. And he goes under a tree in a fetal position and scared and crying and say, I'm so depressed and there's no one left and I'm not going to make it. I might as well die. If we were to diagnose him today, we would say he had depression. He was most certainly depressed. And I'm going to show you something, what I see that actually happens and what he does here. Let me walk through this because I think there's something we can learn from this. 1 Kings chapter 19, Because what it says in verse 3, then he was afraid and arose and ran for his life. What I just said, he ran for his life and he went under the tree in the fetal position, scared to death because a woman said, I'm going to come and kill you. And then he continues, but this is what God says. And then verse 9, and the word of the Lord came to him. So God now is speaking to Elijah. And it's so important what he says. And he tells him that you need to do something. And the Lord passed by him. And so we see he had an experience with God. He went from victory to isolation, but then he had an encounter with God. And everything changed. But he didn't just have some emotional, spiritual encounter with God and he was all healed. Listen to what God told him to do in verse 15. Go return your way to the wilderness of Damascus. And then you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be king over Syria. You see that where he is in isolation and then he has an encounter with God. But he doesn't just have a spiritual, emotional experience. God tells him, get up and go bless somebody else. I don't know who I'm speaking to, but whoever is listening, man, if you've ever been in a state like that, you've been isolated and you are in a depressed cycle. You're stuck there and you're crying out for God. And maybe there's some times you go to church, you put on some worship music, maybe you're even reading the Bible, or maybe you're going after some other things, but you have an experience and you have a momentary relief. It's momentary because you know it goes back to the same old ways. But what God is saying, after that, now get up and go. After you've been with me, you don't just stay there. Get up and go help somebody. The way you find healing is by helping someone else find healing. I don't know, maybe you've been in a drug addiction. Maybe you've been into some sort of sexual addiction. I don't know, pornography. Maybe it's a physical person. Maybe you're in a homosexual relationship right now. I don't know what it is. Whatever it is, you've gotten the cycle and you have moments of depression. And it keeps coming back. And maybe you felt like you kind of had some healing, you had an encounter. If you don't get up and bless somebody else, if you don't get up and tell your story, if you don't get up and help somebody else get out of the place where you just were, you'll be back in the same place. There's so many of those programs that we have. Can I just be honest about what's going on even in the church? We have these programs where people enter a constant cycle of recovery. At some point, you got to get up and go help somebody else. That's the way you truly find freedom and find that you can get out of that depressed state without getting back in the cycle. Get up and bless somebody else.